When we started down this long and lonely styling road, my goal was to get the sidebar and the chat components to be side by side instead of one on top of each other. So to do that, we need to style the main component. So, wouldn't you know, there's a main.css in that static project. It's only got one rule in it. So this shouldn't be too hard. Now, the styling we're doing so far, we're doing in an actual CSS file. And this works because that CSS file is being imported here. So it's being imported into app.js. It's not being imported as anything, right? It doesn't say import app CSS from. It's just importing it. So it's actually importing this into JavaScript, which seems weird. But because we're using Create React App, there's a lot of configuration that's already done for us. So it's already configured for this to just work. Now, you might think that we are importing this stuff to apply only to the app component. But that is not what we're doing. There's nothing special about importing it into this file, aside from we can be guaranteed that anytime we have the app component, we also have that style sheet. But it's still going to work like any other style sheet. The styles are going to be global. They're going to be scoped according to the way we write our selectors in the style sheet. There's nothing magical about importing it here that actually scopes it to that component. But there are ways of doing that. One of the reasons that I actually give my components an outer div with a class name that is the same as the component is so that I can write style rules like this, say .M main, and I know that rule is not going to leak outside of that component. But there are other ways to do that. One way is to actually apply the styles in JavaScript instead of actually using separate CSS files. So we're going to go ahead and do it that way. CSS in JavaScript is a whole big topic. There are a lot of strongly worded blog posts on the topic. Some saying it's the worst thing ever, and some saying it's absolutely irresponsible not to be doing it. We're going to do it so we learn both ways. Plus, I think it's really useful, and it just so happens that in React Native, you have to do something very similar to this. So if you do it this way in React, you can actually share some of your styles between React and React Native. So I like it. So let's do it. So here's what we do. We'll create a JavaScript object that contains those rules as JavaScript properties. So in our main.js, I'm going to create another variable called styles, const styles, not capitalized. It's not a class or anything. It's just an object. Const styles equal empty object. And then I'm basically going to put those rules there. But we need to do it the JavaScript way. So I don't know if you remember, but when we grabbed an element from the page and we changed its style using JavaScript, we would say .style.name of CSS property. And when we did that, we had to camel case the name, right? So align items, align dash items, that's not going to be the name when we do it in JavaScript. It's going to be align capital I items. Similarly, those values don't make any sense in JavaScript, so those are going to have to be strings. Because just the raw word flex, it would look for a variable called flex, and that's not defined. So, long story short, here's what I mean. I will say display colon the string flex. And this is a JavaScript object, not an actual CSS rule, so I use a comma at the end. Align items, I will have to camel case like this. And that will be the string stretch, comma, not semicolon. And height, colon, the string 100 VH. And I always like to have my trailing comma in an object. So that's what I'm going to do. So now that I have the styles there in that object, to actually apply it, on my div here with a class name of main, because that's what this rule is supposed to apply to, right? My selector here says anything with a class of main. I just add a style prop. Looks like an attribute, but this is React, so it's technically a prop. And I can set it to a string by just quoting it. But if I want to set it to anything else, I need to use curly braces. And I want to set it to that object down there, styles. And they're side by side now. So that much seemed to work. And if we inspect this, Look at our elements here. Here's the div, class of main. We see it's an inline style. So doing it this way in JavaScript means that it will actually get added as an inline style, not as a style sheet, which guarantees that these rules are not going to leak outside of that component, outside of that element. Which if you get into big, complicated projects with lots of CSS rules, is a problem that can be hard to manage with CSS. There are lots of strategies for doing that, but this is one way to avoid having to. You know, making a button that looks this way here, and then some other button somewhere changes that in a way you didn't want it to because your selector wasn't specific enough, blah, blah, blah. This gets around that by just applying it in JavaScript. So let's look at these rules. Display flex. That means use flexbox for layout. Align items stretch. So that is a flexbox thing. And what that means, since our flexbox is a row, it means everything in that row is going to stretch to its container height. So they're all going to be width 100, basically. Speaking of which, height 100 VH for the main div itself. What does that mean? What's a VH? Viewport height. So fill the window. It'll be as tall as the window. Yep. Seems legit. If we look at this, if we hover over main, we can see the whole thing turn blue, right? And if you look at sidebar and chat, they're both 100% height as well. So that's what that style is doing. Style main. Questions?